It's quite clear that without addressing the problems of forests, climate change mitigation will not achieve its goals of keeping the world in a 1.5 degree or 2 degrees Celsius limit. However, we come with a new information and new message to the climate change community, basically saying that we should also include productive forests into climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies, because productive forests can contribute in an essential way to reduce emissions, but also they have a strong capacity to replace non-renewable materials which otherwise would be concrete or steel or other plastics and so on. And we talk today about bioeconomy or cyclic economy, and to replace these non-renewable materials by wood-based products and so on. And that is an important additional function which we have in addition to protecting forests where they are. The question is, what is tropical timber? Is it pine? Pine tree in Mexico is for me also a sort of tropical timber, but I think the tropical hardwood, if that is the question, has been exploited very strongly in the past 50, 100, 150 years, and they're very valuable species. And I think the economic relevance of these species has been reduced enormously because there were not enough investments in rebuilding natural forests and so on. So I think in the future tropical forests should have a mix of hardwood and softwood, mass products, and I think the demand for hardwood is growing also internationally. So it would be a good investment to focus also a little bit more on tropical hardwoods. There would be multiple benefits of reinvesting in forests, because without reinvesting in forests, Mexico cannot meet the commitment made at the Paris Agreement to reduce emissions or keep emissions at a certain level, which we call the national determined contribution. And my biggest concern for Mexico is that demand will grow so strongly in the next 20, 30, 40 years that there is a big supply gap in timber for all types of purposes, for furniture, for housing, for pulp and paper and so on. And that supply gap will grow because the population grows and the demand is growing as much as to 45 million cubic meters a year in 2040. So Mexico has to make strategic decisions whether they want to depend in future more on import or grow more forests themselves and reinvest in forests, which would not have only climate and environmental benefits, but would give an enormous number of people additional jobs, income. It would lead to rural development because forests grow in rural areas, and so it would also have a benefit for water issues and so on. So I think climate change mitigation and economic development through forests is a win-win situation and not a mutually exclusive proposition. The main challenges are procuring sufficient investments, because landscape restoration and reforestation needs a lot of finances, financial commitments. Many of the forests are owned by local communities and ejidas. So the question is, how what are the conditions for these communities to maintain the forests and to reinvest in forests. I think the role of government is very important in this regard. But in terms of landscape restoration, forest restoration, which can come through these communities, we also need to have very dedicated industrial investments, because not all of the demand can be supplied through traditional community forestry. But if you look at pulp and paper and other mass products, that has to come through more focused investments in larger, what we would call industrial forests or plantations and so on. So we need all of that. Further continue work with local communities to sustainably manage the forest, to restore the forest, to improve productivity of the forests, but also find investors and investment climate so that private investors can safely invest their money here in lands. A key question is, where is the land for that? Where is where is the land to have no conflicts on? And so it requires a strong approach by the government on landscape planning, because landscape restoration and investment cannot be done in a random way. It has to be based on planning exercises where all the stakeholders are involved. I think governments cannot do everything, and their ways of activities are often limited because there are also political processes in place which have to be considered. So the action of private sector itself is very important in this regard, and we realize over the last 10 years or so an increasing sense of corporate responsibility of big private sector companies. It has started with these zero deforestation initiatives of major food commodity enterprises like the Walmart, like IKEA, like other big players who said we want to procure only green products, legal products, and so on. Most recently in forestry, we see also initiatives from big private sector players, and I name here especially China. A group of big world market leaders, I would say, have come together and have asked ITTO for support to shift from traditional supply of wood from tropical countries to legal and sustainable supply of tropical timber. And of course they face this problem, where is legal and sustainable timber at the scale they need for their production, because 60% of all tropical trade is going to China, and 70% of that trade is re-exported into northern markets, Europe, China itself, but also United States and so on. And so the question is, if these companies make a shift in their policies, many producers in tropical countries have the difficulty to meet the standards, the demand for legal and sustainable timber. And I think the challenge is how to help these producers to make management plans, how to get certified, how to have log tracking systems from the tree in the forest to the market and so on. Mexico has a great potential because there is already much forward thinking, innovative thinking in place, and there are already companies who are producing sustainably and legally, and they have, with this green supply chain initiative, a better opportunity to sell products in international markets and so on. So I think as Mexico has done a lot of work in the past, there will be a great opportunity for these companies to be seen and asked in the market. Well, I think these developments need time. It needs support from the government. It needs an investment framework, an incentive framework where good players are rewarded for good management. I think it has to do a lot with tax and fiscal incentives to promote sustainable management and trade. And I see a lot of things in place already in Mexico, but I think the number of players could be even growing, and that would provide Mexico with economy of scale to compete on international markets. For the moment, I think the main market is United States, but I also think that there is an opportunity for other markets in Europe and also in China and East Asia and so on. We have to overcome internationally the image of tropical timber, which is in the perception of consumers in Europe and in America and so on, linked to illegality, deforestation, degradation and so on. And so it's part of our work in ITTO to convey that message to decision makers and politicians so that these green supply chain ideas can transcend into international policies. And then I think there will be a lot of funding from the international community to support this.